Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet 21, and this is one of the many webinars we do. And we're going to look at issues around climate change, and especially how students and young people think about it, because it's their generation that's going to face the real problems of climate change as we move towards the end of the century. And we've got Natasha Robinson with us today as a student doing an undergraduate degree. She's very, very keen and interested in environmental issues and very concerned about climate change. So we're going to talk to her about it because I think it's really important now to try and get the views of people of the up and coming generation, the generation that's going to face the real consequences of climate change. So Natasha, thanks for joining us today. And maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about your background.
So yes, I'm Natasha. I grew up in the Highlands of Scotland, right just 10 minutes away from Loch Ness, very rural area. And I grew up in quite an international family, I suppose, because my mum is French and my dad's English. But living in Scotland, that's already quite an identity thing. So I'm lucky I've had lots of different sort of inputs into my life. And I did live in France for a bit and went to primary school there for a while. So yes, I've definitely had several different views and lots of wonderful opportunities, which have let me see a lot of different parts of the world.
Well, that's quite a quite a mixture, isn't it? English, French, and Scots. That's problems. No, I'm sure it isn't. But you're doing an undergraduate degree, aren't you? So tell us what you're doing, what you're studying.
So my degree is geography and French, and the geography, now that I'm in my final year, it's very much option. So you can choose what way you would like to take it, whether you'd like to stay with more physical geography and study landscapes and glaciation and everything, or you can study more human topics like I am. This year, some of my options are geography of solidarity, looking at different solidarity that's happened internationally across the globe, as well as cultural geography, looking at social geography as well within cities especially. There's such a range of different things. I'm lucky that with my degree that it can be so varied.
Yeah, but you also look at community solidarity, don't you? Because, I mean, you interviewed me about the MPhil Climate Action Forum Festival, and you're quite interested in terms of how festivals can create solidarity amongst a community or communities. What's made you particularly interested in that?
I feel like a festival or an event is such you can get such a mixture of people. There are people who intentionally went for whatever it is, music, workshops, to meet specific people who they know are going to turn up. But also people just come along sort of out of peer pressure because their friends are going along. So it's a good way of capturing an audience, and also the energy that people have when they leave a festival. Although they're tired, they've often got a lot of more ideas, they've met new people. It's always, you can leave a festival or an event and you've got this idea of what next, you want to act. And it's so important that we start acting, especially on topics like climate change. So I think festivals and events are a really good way to start that. That's why I think it interests me the most.
So you really think festivals can be a catalyst to action? Because, I mean, we often talk about creating awareness, but there's a lot of awareness out there now. It is important, isn't it, to turn that into action? And how do you think festivals do that? I mean, what's the sort of leap from awareness to action?
I think it depends a lot on the way the festival is done, whether it's very much like the typical on a stage, people talking to an audience. But I think it's much more effective to have the audience involved in some way. If you're part of a workshop and you are given some sort of power over something. So if you're in a workshop, which you know is then going to create a project which is going to be put into use, you feel like, oh, I've actually done something now. And it wasn't just, you've got these individual actions that you can do, sort of changing your diet or recycling, but then that's just one step further because it's impacting other people as well by coming up with a project or just the people that you can meet and the networks that you can find in a festival. That's part as well of what I think. But this is the thing, is what my dissertation sort of looking at is, yes, that's all good, but how do we make this long term? Because the whole idea of festivals and events is they're generally quite short term. So how do we then make the impact long term?
And have you come to any conclusions about that yet?
Partly. I feel like a physical location really does make a difference. And how often the events take place also makes a difference. So I've been looking at all sorts of events. I've ended up sort of branching out to so many different things. I need to work out how to narrow it down. But things like community gardens where they meet up weekly. And so you then end up getting friends out of it, and the impact that you can make when you're meeting weekly for a gardening session. It's still an event, but you're getting to have a much larger impact out of that. Or just having a physical place where after the festival, you know, you can go back to for physical resources, or because you know that there's maybe an after school club that your kids can go to. And while they're there, you can also look at like secondhand clothes. Like if there's a hub where this stuff is all happening, you can sort of accidentally get involved in other things without realizing. So what I found is the festivals which have got a physical location afterwards where the initial idea is carried on can make a really big difference.
The festival we're involved in, which is one that's under the Climate Coalition, is a week festival where lots of things are happening in different places. I mean, do you think that a festival should be about celebration only? It should be about how you change your lifestyle? Or should it be also, as we're doing in a couple of events, putting pressures on local decision makers or MPs that they should take more action, they should stop incineration? A combination of, you know, questioning decision makers as well as celebrating success.
I think it's a good opportunity to do both, to do as much as you possibly can, as long as you can manage it. But I mean, if you can get pressure on governments, it's different groups in society who don't meet all the time. So if you can have the public talking and having a consultation, but with an MP there, it's not every day you meet an MP and can have a conversation. You can email them with lots of petitions and lots of things you would like to change, but actually having them physically there, that's something that a festival can facilitate, or an event can facilitate. So I think if you can do both, worth trying.
Okay, so we are trying.
Yes.
Then, you know, you're an undergraduate, you're studying in the area of environmentalism and climate change and so on. But that's because you have a deep concern about it, isn't it? I mean, what's led to your concern about the issue of climate change?
I feel like there's been several sort of turning points. I feel like my whole life I was quite aware of the environment. I was only about 10 where I decided I just really didn't want to eat meat anymore. So I haven't eaten meat in, 13 years now. And when recycling sort of started, I started doing that. It was just all these little things that, for me, it's just things I've always been aware of. But one sort of turning point, which sort of turned it to like, oh, wow, this is urgent now, was just before I went to university. I lived in Chile for a year. I was volunteering in a primary school over there. And that was the year 2016 to 2017. And it was sort of my first, after studying geography in school and learning about natural disasters and volcanoes and earthquakes, I actually experienced it all within a year. And there were really bad forest fires. And then just a couple of months later, landslides, and seeing it happen rather than just studying it, and then being involved with the like renovation of like clearing the roads and all of the sort of stuff that comes after the whole experience, rather than just reading it in a textbook. That was when I decided I wanted to study geography rather than French. I ended up doing both, but that was, I think, the sort of shock factor that I needed, which has sort of started off all of this that's happened since.
But presumably, if you want to study this. You don't want to just study it, do you? You want it to be a springboard for action.
Yeah.
And universities very often, scientists particularly, are people who shy away from action. They shy away to talking to people in a narrative that people can understand. They use a language which is in the house all the time. When, from your experience, and you haven't had a lot, you've had some, but your experience of universities, do you find that's a problem, or is it changing? Are academics, are people who work there realizing they've got to go out there and spread a message and not just do research?
Yeah, I think that one thing that's been, at least in my experience, maybe I've just been hearing it differently to other students, but I feel like right from the beginning, we've sort of been told, find your role within all of this. And for instance, I'm studying geography with, some people are doing it as a science, but I'm really not science orientated at all. So I'm much more community, culturally aware when I study this. And like I've known from the beginning that my role in all of this is education. I've taught for 2 years now, 1 year in Chile, and then last year for my year abroad in France, I was also teaching. And I just sort of realized that that's where I would like to make my difference. I've seen the difference that lecturers can make on me, and I'd quite like to make that impact on the younger generation. And I feel like my lecturers have always been very much, some of you are going to go into research, some of you are going to go into government, some of you are going to do this. And they've been very open to the fact that we're all going to do different things, which I think is good. Like if I look at my peers in my geography class, and it gives me a lot of hope to think these are the people who are going to carry on doing this. And if we can all find our role, I'm hopeful.
You're hopeful, but I mean, you're doing a course, aren't you, that is full of people who have a conscience about climate change and the environment. What's your experience of other students doing science, doing maths, doing physics, doing business studies? I mean, do they share the same sort of passion, or is it just an enclave within the university that has this passion?
I think it is quite widespread, because I've been in first and second year, back when I had more time, I'd sometimes go along to flatmates' lectures and see what their classes were like. And I feel like, I'm not sure if it was a conscious decision by the education, I don't know who it is who writes our curriculums, but I do find that it's something that's become part of a lot of different subjects. Just having a course on that includes the climate somehow. And especially I feel like with COP coming up and us all being students in Glasgow, every department's trying to do something. Like the students doing journalism are getting trained up to be reporters on COP26. The politics students are doing a mock COP event where they're going to be debating as if they were the representatives at COP. So I feel like it's not only geography students, I feel like it is quite a mixture of different students. Even in my French classes, the reading and sort of documentary sources that we end up having to translate, the themes are changing as well. It very often is more about the environment or about social justice issues.
So you, so it's winding out, and that's good. I mean, you're not that far away from having been at school. Do you feel that in school the curriculum addresses climate change in the right way, or is there a lot to be had that would further treating climate change in a way that students can understand and engage with?
I think it's hard for me to talk on this because I've had quite a unique education, especially my primary education, because up in the Highlands of Scotland, my entire school was 28 students. So the possibilities that we had were quite different. We went for, I'm not sure if it exists outside of Scotland, but a green flag for our school. And to get the green flag, we had to do a number of projects. So every week we were out in the garden gardening, and we created like hanging, what do you call them? Hanging flower baskets all the way around the schools. Yeah, we even just like any building that wasn't very pretty, we ended up painting it with flowers and with animals and everything. And it was always something we were really included in. And I know that that was probably very unique to my school, but that was my experience of it. So I know that had an impact on me. And I'm sure it happened in a lot of schools, because I have seen a lot of schools with these green flags. But I think in terms of the actual curriculum, I think a lot more could be done. I did leave school, I think, 5 years ago. So I think things have already changed quite a bit. But yeah, I think because especially in high school, each subject's very separate. The times where it was addressed was often these inter-subject projects that we would do. I remember a project between art, graphic communication, and physics, where we had to make these little what do you call them? Drag race, like dragster cars that we could run. And those are the projects where we had to use like recycled materials to make it. That was when it would come up rather than when we were just in our subjects individually. I think there's a lot of potential for it to be incorporated in, though.
Okay. You're in Glasgow, and COP26 is happening in Glasgow in November. Do you think because it's happening in Glasgow, it's given a special emphasis to students and people who live in Scotland, that they're probably more on top of this, aware of this, want to do something about it, even more than people who live elsewhere, including England?
I think so. I'm not sure if it's just because I'm within my university bubble a little bit at the moment, because as well as studying for the university, I'm also working in the environmental team for the university. So it's all I hear every day, but I'm not sure if it's the same for every other student. But I do know already, there was a volunteering scheme for people who wanted to volunteer at COP back in, I think it was March, and I applied with it along with, I think it was 11,000 other people. And all people in Glasgow who wanted to sort of show off Glasgow to all of these delegates who are going to be coming over. So I think even just that shows how many people are going to be getting involved. And I think that when it happens, it's going to be unmissable. You're not going to be able to realize that it's not happening.
So there's a lot of activity taking place, lots of preparations at the moment. Are you worried, though, that, you talk about festivals showing what people are doing on an individual basis. Are you worried that COP26 won't sort of grasp the nettle and realize that it's not just about changing lifestyles and doing, small things which are important, but it's about the big things. It's about dealing with corporations that emit carbon dioxide. It's about stopping emissions. It's about dealing with the banks. Those big issues that concern you as well. And is that what concerns students? I mean, are they just interested in the smaller things that you were talking about?
No, I think that as well. It's just harder to know how to change that. So it's harder to know, like, to make an individual decision, you can change that overnight, but something like putting pressure on a government, even I wouldn't really know how to start. So I think that if the facilitation is there, for COP to then impact these other communities, then it will be easier for people to know how to get involved. Even just the fact that, like I said, the politics lecturers are organising this mock COP for their students, that will already add like a whole cohort of students who are now more aware of how the actual negotiations happen. Because it's one of these big events that happens regularly, but we're not entirely sure of how it happens. So when you know that sort of the promises that were made 2 years ago weren't kept, it's quite hard to know why exactly, and to know how to get involved. It's hard to know your place, I think.
So, I mean, do you think it's about influence MPs, or do students feel they've got to follow the XR model? It's on the streets, that's where it's going to happen.
I think it's a mixture. Like right now, working in this team of other students who are working for the university, but also helping to make the university more green, it's quite a nice position to be in, because helping a university is quite a big organization. If you can help a university to change its practices, that's quite a big difference you're going to make. And if you can make one university in Glasgow do it, then hopefully the other ones will also follow. They're very likely already doing a whole lot of initiatives as it is. And then once a university can do it, why can't all of the schools in Glasgow do the same thing? Or I feel like there's a lot of lead by example. but I don't really have an answer.
That's interesting what you say, that you're at university and you think you and students can help the university to change. Mm-hmm. Is that a good message, a sort of optimistic message to people who say they don't know what to do? They can try and make their organization change, their corporation, their bank, their business, their school, their university, not just on the streets, but where they actually reside every day.
Yeah, and that's what I've liked, even just seeing all of these small businesses starting up over lockdown, closed for several months, and now that they've opened, I've noticed they've changed. They've started implementing a lot more initiatives that make them a bit more green, or that make them a bit more inclusive in some way. And the thing is, these owners of these businesses are very often people who you could meet at a festival, or who you could meet at the local regular cycle social every Saturday. So if we can get them coming to these events and get these conversations happening, it's not quite as out of reach a person as you might first imagine.
So you're doing all this, but you also want to carry on doing it, don't you? I mean, you actually don't want to go into a banking future or whatever. You want to go into a green future, and the work you want to do, you want it to be green. Tell us what you plan to do, what you hope to do.
Well, as I was saying before, I see my role as being in education, preferably in formal education. My dream that at some point in my life I hope will happen is to run some sort of community centre, but which also has regular school trips where school children can come, especially in large cities, in more deprived areas. I would love to have some sort of a community garden which impacted the community on a daily basis, but also allowed for school trips where students could come and meet these people who are doing all of these projects, but also physically garden for a day, or do these things that they probably don't have the chance of doing if they don't have their own garden, or if their school doesn't provide these sorts of activities already. I would love to run some sort of community centre where they could get involved like that, but also if it could become part of their curriculum. If sort of in a primary school, they knew that for the next month after visiting, they were then going to study, I'm not sure, I haven't thought about this yet, but sort of if they were going to start studying the wildlife in Glasgow that they could end up seeing. You can just sort of start to get them to open their mind like that, and then perhaps even get them to visit again a month later and see the difference. I think that sort of education, but in a community centre where there's a physical space where they can turn up to for after school if they like to just need a safe space to hang around. I think that's what I would like to do, is some sort of community centre, especially after this research and finding out all of the community centres that already exist and all the activities that they do, especially for children. That's the sort of education I would like to get involved with.
Okay, I mean, and obviously you've done a lot of research, so you'll probably do very well in an interview. You've got a good CV already on that. But the other thing is, I mean, you sound incredibly optimistic, and some people would say, well, young people should be fearful about the future. But I found that people of my age and a bit younger are more pessimistic than young people are. Do you think there is a difference between the generations about how they feel about this? And do you think in any way there is a generational conflict?
I think it's interesting because just a couple of weekends ago, I don't often see my gran because she lives in the south of England, but there's her who's 92, my dad who's in his 60s, and myself having a conversation, because she just said to me, like, your job is to save the planet. And it was funny because she said to my dad, who's her son, and said, I know you've been doing this for the last 40 years, but this is this is actually happening now. And I think the difference, at least in that example, is less what we would like to happen, but more that I've grown up with it as it being normal, whereas my gran has had to adapt to all of these things. My dad's also had to adapt to certain new things. So it's the adaptation change, I think, that's different. I find views-wise, I don't find myself often disagreeing with people a lot older than me. I think it's a change that we're all making. We're all becoming more aware. Just it's easier in a way for young people to make the change because it's not such a drastic change that we have to make. Even just things like recycling. I was talking to my dad the other day. I said, when did recycling actually start? And it was a lot more recently than I thought. But for me, there's always been a compost bin and a recycling bin. I haven't had to think about it, whereas that's things that older generations will have had to adapt to.
That's very interesting what you're saying, actually, that I mean, young people, are used to the world they live in now, and they can work from what they know. But the older generation has the problem of adaptation. Because as you grow up, you sort of imbibe into yourself the period you live in. And to change to a different scenario, which is happening rapidly, is very difficult. But if you grow up in it, I mean, it's like computers. The older generation, first of all, found it difficult. But if you were young, you were, playing Fortnite by the time you were 6.
Yeah.
And people of my age are saying until they meet their grandchildren, what is Fortnite? So there is that problem of adaptation. How can older people adapt? Can younger people help them do that?
I think so. I think even just being able to have these conversations, and the fact that like I've got the privilege to be at uni and learning all of this from people who are researching it right at the moment. We've got in some ways the most up-to-date information. So what I can then bring to my parents and to my grandparents starts to make them realize, oh, actually it is possible, because it's quite a drastic idea for them as well, for how would it be possible to say run a business completely sustainably, or without even just things like without using any paper, without printing off things, without sending letters, or without physically having to commute to your workplace. Yet we know that's possible now because we've all been in uni virtually for a year. So it's easier for us to explain how these things can happen because we're living it every day. And I think we do have a privilege, especially university students, to be able to get all of this information. So it's easier, say, for us than a business leader who wants to change, but has to do their own research to find out how to do it.
So listening to you, and I said you sound very optimistic, what is it within you, and with some of your student colleagues as well, what is it within you that makes you so hopeful about the future? Yeah, the future is dire, but you also sound hopeful.
I think I've always been a glass half full person. So I think that is a lot of what plays into it. But I've definitely had points where I was very I didn't understand how we were going to fix this. And I still have that, especially with things like the IPCC report coming out and everyone talking about that, because all I seem to hear about is all the negative side of it. And it is easy to get demotivated, but not acting is only going to make things worse. I would rather act and make things a little bit better, and the impact that we can have, even if it doesn't save the planet and stop the planet getting warmer, if we can still help people to start gardening regularly, to change their habits, it's not only things that will save the planet, it's also good for people to be doing these things. It's good for your diet, it's good for your body to be eating less meat, it's good for your creativity to be buying in secondhand shops rather than just buying what you see your idols wearing. There's lots of other benefits outside of just the original saving the planet to stop it from dying. I think that, there's lots of other little parts to it. And even just speaking to the conversations that it can start up when you have seen something that's worked and has been really successful, or talking to someone who's been to one of your festivals. When I have these interviews with them where, obviously Enfield hasn't happened yet, but some of these other festivals which have happened, the energy that people get afterwards, that's worth it. Even if they implement as much as they can, but there's still the impact they're making in terms of carbon emissions is actually quite small. It's still worth doing.
Okay. We sort of come to the end of the sort of half hour now, and it's been really, really interesting talking to you. I mean, if people wanted to find out more about what you're doing, is there any way they can do that? Would you want them to do it?
Yes, well, I don't have sort of a page or anything for it because it is sort of an academic piece of work rather than, if it was a personal piece, it would be all over my social media. But I have my university email address. I don't know if that could be put into the caption, and also a questionnaire for anyone who's been to any kind of event which has worked on social justice or climate change in some way, from a festival to a climate march to a workshop that you've been to within university for something. So I've got a questionnaire for that as well. I can send the links to both of them, or just on social media. Okay. I don't know if I'll be tagged in this, or I'll put my name in the comments or something for people to reach out.
Okay, yeah, we'll put a link to the questionnaire on the video when we stream it, which is good. Anyhow, thank you for doing it, because it's been really interesting to listen to your sort of message for the future, what you're doing, what other people are doing in the university, and the sort of optimism and hope you've got for, you know, tackling what is going to be the biggest problem for us all in the future. So it's been really incredibly interesting in doing this with you, and I appreciate you doing it, because I know it's quite an awesome thing to be interviewed sometime. You interviewed me, so I'm getting my own back now. Yeah. But it was, you know, it was it was really interesting. So thanks for doing it, and we'll end this interview now.